My name is Zundamon. Today, we'll continue from where we left off in Part 1, discussing the history of Nintendo gaming consoles. Let's go! Is anyone familiar with the home gaming console released after the Super Nintendo Entertainment System? It's not the Nintendo Ultra 64. It was a 3D gaming console called the Virtual Boy, released in July 1995. With sales of 150,000 units in Japan and 770,000 units worldwide, its sales plummeted. So many people might not know about it. In short, it was a VR gaming console. It's amazing that VR games existed so long ago. The console was divided into 3 parts: the goggle section, the stand, and the controller. The stand supported the goggles, and you played by looking into the goggles and using the controller. This was a sudden and drastic change from previous hardware and gameplay styles. The screen displayed a world composed only of red and black. Although the game screens were expressed with red LEDs, they had a unique style. And despite being monochromatic, you could still sense depth. And the stereoscopic effect was not bad. By showing different images to each eye, the games could be played in 3D. However, it didn't sell very well. Despite the depth perception, the game's enjoyment was questionable. Moreover, only 19 games were released for the Virtual Boy in Japan, all within 1995. Still, I think it was great that they took on the challenge of VR within the technological limits and constraints of the time. Next up, the highly anticipated Nintendo home gaming console released in 1996, the Nintendo Ultra 64, also known as the 64 or N64. This console was beloved by many and significantly transformed the gaming world. Its tagline, "The game is changing, 64 will change it," highlights the numerous innovations brought by the Nintendo Ultra 64. The 64, released on June 23, 1996, was a home console developed as the successor to the Super Famicom. It was Nintendo's first home console to support true 3D games. Featuring a 64-bit CPU, its 3D technology boasted the highest specs among hardware of its time. While the PlayStation and Sega Saturn featured 32-bit CPUs, the 64 proudly showcased its 64-bit CPU as a key selling point. This console introduced many groundbreaking games, such as Super Mario 64, allowing players to experience 3-dimensional spaces freely. A higher bit count meant greater computational power, enabling broader expressions. However, this didn't simply double the performance. One distinctive feature of the 64 was its unconventional controller design. The centrally placed 3D stick was designed for smooth movement within the game space. Additionally, the Z button on the back could be operated while holding the 3D stick, allowing precise controls such as directing the camera to specific points. The controller also had 4 ports, up from the usual 2, enabling up to 4 players to play simultaneously, a feature that became standard in later Nintendo consoles. The analog stick was introduced for the first time, and the separate rumble pack enabled vibration functionality. An accessory called the 64DD disk drive was developed for the 64. Attached underneath the console, it allowed for downloading additional content and rewriting data. However, the 64DD was delayed and ultimately released only in Japan. Development of the 64 began in 1993, initially called Project Reality. It involved technical partners like Silicon Graphics Inc., SGI, and MIPS Technologies. The 64, with its revolutionary 64-bit CPU, boasted high 3D polygon processing power and rendering quality. Known by its codename Ultra 64, it was publicly revealed as the Nintendo Ultra 64 in 1994. In Japan, it was priced at 25,000 yen upon release. It launched in the US on September 29, 1996, with 350,000 units selling out in just 3 days. However, despite its high performance, the console posed challenges for game development. as the limited ROM cartridge capacity made software development difficult. This led to fewer participating developers, with popular series like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy being released on PlayStation, resulting in lower shipment numbers for the 64 compared to other consoles of its generation. However, don't worry. The 64 produced numerous classic games. Super Mario 64 set a new standard for 3D action games, astonishing many gamers. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time was loved for its innovative gameplay and storytelling. Furthermore, multiplayer games like Mario Kart 64 and GoldenEye 007 allowed friends and family to enjoy playing together. It had a significant impact on the gaming industry and played a crucial role in developing future game consoles. The final shipment count was about 32.93 million units worldwide, with approximately 5.54 million units sold in Japan and 20.63 million units in the US. Support for repairs ended in 2007, marking the end of its era. The 64, an innovative console from Nintendo, continues to have a lasting influence. With its high-performance hardware, diverse software, and multiplayer gaming, the 64 expanded the joy of gaming and remains beloved by many gamers. By the way, my favorite game on the 64 is Super Smash Bros. This concludes my explanation of the 64. In 1998, the year after the release of the 64, the Game Boy Color, the successor to the Game Boy, was released. The Game Boy, which had been monochrome until then, evolved with a color LCD display. The transition to color enabled various expressions, significantly broadening the range of games. Thanks to the color display, I found the creatures on the screen even more adorable and fell in love with them. Sales reached 1.98 million units in Japan and 49.27 million units worldwide. It featured an infrared communication function. While a communication cable was necessary for actual battles, as infrared communication could only handle small data exchanges, it allowed easy interactions with many people. It was fun to use this feature to exchange greetings and collect in-game items. Depending on the game, infrared communication was not limited to Game Boy Color units, but could also include items like TV remotes and the Pocket Pikachu color toy. Incidentally, Pikachu was extremely popular at the time and even appeared on airplane fuselages, a tradition that continues today with updated designs. Additionally, it had an online communication function. You might think, online function? Even back then? But unlike today's convenient Wi-Fi, it required connecting to a mobile phone via a dedicated mobile adapter. Since it used a mobile phone, the person initiating the connection incurred phone charges, which were about 0.1 per minute at the exchange rate of the time. This was a burden for children's parents, and thus did not become widespread. The Game Boy Color was immensely popular worldwide due to its color display and excellent compatibility with past Game Boy titles and peripherals. Its release further invigorated the handheld gaming market. My favorite games were Pokemon Gold and Silver, Kirby Tilt and Tumble, and Dragon Warrior Monsters. Next, let's delve into the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance was released in 2001, priced at 9,800 yen. Developed as the complete next-generation successor to the Game Boy Color, it was initially slated for a 2000 release, but was delayed by 6 months to 2001. However, this delay was not entirely negative, as it allowed a robust launch lineup of 30 titles, surprising and delighting eager gamers. On the release day, popular games like Mario and F-Zero were available, making it an exciting time for fans. One of the Game Boy Advance's significant strengths was its backward compatibility with previous Game Boy games. Now, let's go over the specifications of the Game Boy Advance. The screen was 2.9 inches, 1.5 times larger than the Game Boy Color, significantly improving visibility. It could display 32,000 colors simultaneously, providing much more vivid gameplay compared to the Game Boy Color. Additionally, the CPU was upgraded from an 8-bit to a 32-bit processor. This enhancement allowed for effects like transparency, pseudo 3D, and layering of images. The addition of L and R buttons improved control, and it supported 4-player simultaneous communication using a cable. The Game Boy Advance could also communicate with the GameCube, released the same year in 2001, through a cable, indicating an early integration with home consoles. This technology laid the groundwork for the system found in today's Switch. The Game Boy Advance was incredibly popular, selling 612,000 units in its first week. This high initial sales figure reflected the anticipation and excitement surrounding the console. Many children had likely saved their allowances for months in preparation for its release. In 2003, a minor revision called the Game Boy Advance SP was released. This model featured a front light and an internal rechargeable battery, freeing users from the constant need to purchase batteries, much to the relief of parents. The most popular game for the Game Boy Advance was Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, released in 2002, selling over 1 million copies in its first week. Ultimately, it sold over 5 million copies, becoming a mega hit. The popularity of Pokémon further boosted the Game Boy Advance market. The wireless communication device included with Ruby and Sapphire was the precursor to modern communication systems. As a derivative of the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Micro was released in 2005. It was smaller, lighter, and featured a backlight for improved visibility. However, it did not achieve the same popularity as the SP. One reason for its lack of success was poor timing. Nintendo had announced the Nintendo DS, a new handheld system, before the PSP's debut, releasing it in 2004. The Game Boy Micro was launched during the transition to the DS. Consequently, new software for the Game Boy Advance ceased after the release of Final Fantasy VI Advance on November 30th, 2006. Production of the Game Boy Advance, SP, and Micro consoles has since ended, with second-hand markets being the primary source for these systems. The Game Boy Advance had a brief yet brilliant run, with its successor released just 3 years and 9 months after its debut. How did you find this overview? Did it bring back any nostalgic memories? Finally, let's introduce the Nintendo GameCube. Its design, resembling a square box, is quite distinctive. Initially announced in 1999 under the codename Dolphin, the GameCube was released in 2001 with a retail price of 24,800 yen. It sold 4.04 million units in Japan and around 21.74 million units worldwide. Although the Nintendo Ultra 64 was praised by many, it also had issues with hardware design, such as its difficulty in game development. With these lessons in mind, the GameCube was developed under the concept of creating the best TV game machine ever. The GameCube abandoned traditional ROM cartridges in favor of optical discs based on DVDs. Learning from past mistakes, it focused on ease of game development and actual performance rather than just catalog specs. This time, consideration was also given to third-party developers. Why didn't they adopt DVDs directly? One reason was to use a method called constant angular velocity, CAV, which maintains a constant disk rotation speed, reducing load times, a common drawback of optical drives. Another reason was to prevent piracy by using a proprietary format. However, a downside was that its data capacity was less than that of standard DVDs. Nonetheless, switching to optical discs was a bold move for Nintendo. The controller featured 2 sticks on the left and right, with a new dual grip design. This controller received high praise from users and was compatible with subsequent Nintendo consoles, remaining popular for a long time. The GameCube was designed to be played with the Game Boy Advance. By connecting the Game Boy Advance to the GameCube, Each player could have their own screen, allowing for cooperative play. This offered a unique gaming experience where multiple players could progress with different perspectives simultaneously. For reference, you can watch the commercial for The Legend of Zelda: Four Swords Adventures. The GameCube also had customizable nameplates with various designs. While not sold commercially, these nameplates could be obtained through Club Nintendo by accumulating points or during events for purchasing software. Today, these nameplates fetch premium prices on auction sites. Note that GameCubes produced after May 2004 had non-removable nameplates. At the time of the GameCube's release, Nintendo was trying to regain market share from the formidable PlayStation 2 amid third-party defections. In September 2001, the launch titles were Luigi's Mansion, Wave Race, Blue Storm, and Super Monkey Ball. Sega, a former competitor in the hardware race, released Super Monkey Ball as a launch title. And Capcom announced exclusive main series titles of Resident Evil for the GameCube, actively courting third-party developers. However, Capcom later rescinded this exclusivity, porting Resident Evil 4 to the PS2. Nintendo has faced challenges against the PlayStation and has been experimenting continuously. The GameCube is part of this history. This concludes the overview of the GameCube. While not directly related to gaming consoles, many Japanese people fondly remember singing along to the Pikmin commercial song. I really want you to know a part of that song, so after the greeting, I'll play the commercial. Please listen to it. That concludes today's explanation. I plan to create part 3, but since I want to work on other videos, the next part will be posted quite a bit later. What are your favorite game titles? Let me know in the comments. Your supportive comments mean a lot to me. Thank you. See you again. Bye-bye.
僕たちピクミンあなただけについてゆく今日も運ぶ戦う増えるそして食べられるいろんな命が生きているこの星で今日も運ぶ戦う増えるそして食べられる
任天堂ゲームキューブピクミンゲームキューブ
引っこ抜かれて戦って食べられてでも私たち愛してくれとは言わないよ引っこ抜かれて戦って食べられてでも私たちあなたに従い尽くします
任天堂ゲームキューブピクミンゲームキューブ
そろそろ遊んじゃおうかなもっと頑張ってみようかなんてあの空に恋とかしながら
任天堂ピクミン好評発売中 CM ソングが CD になった
ゲームキューブ